to right, uh, and, and also so that we will show it later to Institut Français, so the embassy.
Great. Okay, thank you. I'll just start sharing the screen. Can you see it? I think it's
No,
loading.
it's still loading. Give it a minute. Yeah, we can see it now.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so today we are gathered all together to talk about sustainable development, which was our main subject. So because it is a big subject, we decided to choose a small part inside of it, of course, and we decided to focus on fast fashion industry. So to dive a little bit more into the subject, we would like to tell you a little story about Milo, which is an invented character, which is a cotton. And Ruta will tell you the story of Milo so that you can see the main issues of fast fashion industry.
So I'll just start reading out to you what we've written, the story of Milo. So here you go, meet Milo, a cotton plant in Texas. And after drinking 2,700 liters of fresh water and being pressed into bales, Milo is sent to a textile mill in China. There, he is bleached and dyed with synthetic toxic chemicals, which will later be drained into local waterways without undergoing treatment. And now, a finished cloth fabric, Milo is sent to a garment factory near Dhaka in Bangladesh, where he is cut and sewn into a feminist t-shirt by Salma, an 18-year-old rural migrant working long hours in unpaid conditions, scraping to make ends meet with her meager wages, and who lives in perpetual fear of an industrial accident like the Rana Plaza collapse. After being shipped off to an H&M outlet in San Francisco, Milo is mindlessly picked by Kathy, who intends to secure only 3 uses out of him, lest she be accused of outfit repeating. Finally, after traveling for more than 16,000 miles in just a few months, Milo lies wasted in a landfill in Kenya, wondering where it all went wrong. So through this journey of Milo, we just got a rough glimpse into what fast fashion is all about. But we'd still like to explain to you its meaning so we can understand what it really means for us. So to begin with, if you just do a quick internet search, it will tell you that fast fashion is an industrial model which creates inexpensive clothing produced rapidly by mass market retailers in response to the latest trends. But sadly, that is just one side of fast fashion, and there's a whole lot more that goes on behind the scenes. And because we view fast fashion as something that has democratized luxury clothing for us, we don't really think about how they are able to produce clothing at such cheap prices. But when we ask how they are able to do that, we realize that there are many hidden costs. And to understand that a little bit better, Raika will tell us about the history of fast fashion.
So historically, in a coincidence, the creations of fast fashion and just the fast fashion model actually link both India and France. And in the late 18th century, in the late 17th century, I'm sorry, a businessman in France called Christophe Philippe Oberkampf started a factory during the Industrial Revolution to mimic the Indian fabric. So on the pictures, in the first one, that's the traditional Indian calico fabric that's made of a very durable cotton, and it can last for a very long time, and it's hand printed by artisans. And at the bottom, we can see Oberkampf's fabric, which was made by its synthetic dyes, and these were printed in a factory on very cheap material. So he actually laid the groundwork for what fast fashion is today, where customers are encouraged to buy clothes and use them as something which is very temporary and disposable instead of investing in really durable items. And he also started the entire trend of seasons in fashion, which is followed both by high fashion brands and by all kinds of fast fashion outlets today. Now, Ruta's going to tell us a little bit more about how fast fashion relates to sustainability.
Yeah. So, because as you know, our module is sustainable development, we decided to look at the 17 sustainable development goals that are chalked out by the United Nations. And when we look at them, we realize that fast fashion is related to a lot of them. But the major ones, I guess you could say, are responsible consumption and production, clean water and sanitation, and also gender equality. But there are, of course, many other goals as well. And through this, we realized that sustainable development as a concept is not solely related to environmental sustainability. It also has a huge economic and social dimension to it, which is precisely why we decided to focus on our research on all of these aspects. And later, we also did a comparison of the Indian and French textile and fashion industry. And we ended our research by looking into some of the potential solutions which various stakeholders can adopt to make these industries a bit more sustainable in the years to come. And so to do our research, we conducted primary research as well as we used primary research as well as secondary research techniques. For the primary research, we conducted a very own survey. I think it was the first time we conducted a survey, all of us, for which we received a total of 80 respondents, both French and Indian. And later, we also conducted 2 interviews with the representatives of 2 sustainable fashion brands. One was an Indian brand, the other was a French brand. So the Indian brand was Tamlin Chatty and the French brand was Boom. And also for the secondary resources, we just relied on online articles, be it news articles or blog articles, and also documentaries and reports of various organizations. And now, finally, without further ado, we'll look into what we learned in our research. So we start by looking at the dimensions of fast fashion and why it is important to consider them. And that is why Lizelle will start with the economic aspect first.
So firstly, we will focus on the economic point of view of the fast fashion industry. In fact, to be sustainable, an industry also needs to be economically viable. Fortunately, fast fashion is one of the biggest global economic fields nowadays. In 2020, this industry globally generated a revenue worth of $25.09 billion, which is enormous. So the fast fashion employs 300 million people around the world. It is also a field that is growing every year. And before the pandemic, fast fashion were globally expected to increase by 3% in 2020. So causes of this increase are multiple. So first of all, globalization and relocation of factories allowed fast fashion brands to sell their products much cheaper because, of course, production costs in third world countries such as India or Bangladesh are much cheaper. So clothes can be sold much cheaper. IFM, l'Institut Français de la Mode, has also reported that people are less willing to spend money on clothes than before. So this factor was very used by fast fashion industry because fast fashion brands sell products for like €3. So you can find t-shirts or jeans for €3 only. So fast fashion brands are playing on the will of people to buy more without spending more. Secondly, fast fashion or brands are also able to make new clothes in only a few weeks. Because of that, they can follow the latest trends and attract more people to buy their products. Globally, it's estimated that we buy 60 pieces of clothes each year on average. So all these factors are pushing us to buy and buy and buy more and more. So as we can see, fast fashion is one of the most beneficial economic fields nowadays. And we can also note that because of the pandemic in 2020, annual sales have decreased by 70% in France, according to IFM. But we can also note that e-shopping on a website like Shine or ASOS is also becoming a habit, especially during the lockdown, when people could not go to local store. They had to buy on internet. But we can say that shopping on website, of course, is shopping in fast fashion brands, because most of the fashion we can find in internet is fast fashion. There's no local brands on internet. So in conclusion, we can say fast fashion industry is viable and looks sustainable on an economic point of view, but we will see that it is not the case when we will focus on ecological or social aspect that Ruta and Raika will introduce to you.
So, like Rizal very well explained that the fashion industry is a highly profitable industry, but on a closer look, we realize that all of these profits come at a huge ecological and social cost. As far as the ecological aspect is concerned, we found that the fashion industry harms the environment in 5 major ways. The first of which is water consumption and water pollution. So the textile industry, is the second largest consumer of water among all the industries, and it uses a lot of it for cotton cultivation and wet processing. So wet processing are just essentially dyeing and bleaching practices. And as we all know, cotton is a highly water intensive plant. But one statistic which we found, which was very staggering, is that it takes 2,000 gallons of water to produce just one pair of jeans. And to give you some perspective about that, that is also the equivalent of 10 years worth of drinking water for one person, which is a lot of water to say the least. And this water highly extensive cotton farming also causes a lot of water scarcity, and primarily in the developing countries. And so for this, we can take the example of the Aral Sea in Uzbekistan, which was desertified because of the cotton farming. And as regards the pollution aspect of it, most of the environmental hazards are caused because of the dying wastewaters, which are like we saw in the case of Milo, they are just discharged into the local water bodies without proper treatment. And because these waters contain heavy metals and chemicals like lead and arsenic, they pose health risks to the ecosystem as well as the nearby residents. Secondly, the fashion industry also has a very high carbon footprint. Um, in fact, the carbon dioxide equivalent of the textile industry is more than international flights and maritime combined. And this high carbon footprint comes because of the high energy use, as well as the fiber extraction techniques that are used, because the majority of the garments in the industry are made with polyester and other synthetic materials which are derived from fossil fuels. Thirdly, we have chemical use. So right from the beginning, farmers use a lot of agrochemicals like insecticides and pesticides for growing cotton and other fibers. But these chemicals also are a cause for health concerns because they've been known to cause cancer, respiratory, and reproductive diseases, among many other diseases. And these chemicals also further degrade the fertility of the soil because they seep into the ground, and they also pollute runoff waters and cause freshwater pollution. And at the same time, they end up causing soil infertility. Fourthly, the industry also creates a lot of plastic pollution. In fact, the fashion industry is the second largest plastic polluter because of its high use of synthetic fibers like nylon and acrylic and polyester, and all of which are non-biodegradable. So what happens is that these fibers, through processes like washing and laundering, these fibers are released in the form of microplastics and get dumped into the ocean. Lastly, we have waste generation. On the production side, we noted that 15% of production waste is just cutting waste fabric. So, for example, if I'm cutting a garment, not efficient, the cutting waste fabric, the scraps uh, which are left out will be a lot. And so 15% of the production waste is just that. And we also found a production practice wherein it's called dead stock. So that's basically when clothes are not sold at retail shops, they just take them and throw them away without ever using them. And related to post-production waste, we obviously have the waste produced by garments from the consumers. Waste which doesn't garments that do not end up in the second-hand market are obviously burnt or end up in a landfill like Milo. And we also noted the practice of dumping, which, like the name suggests, the developing countries often end up dumping their textile waste into the developing nations. Yeah, I think that's it. And now we'll move on to the social aspect of fast fashion.
So, the social aspect of fast fashion is arguably one of the worst affected areas because, unlike the ecological aspect, the communities actually feel its effects almost immediately. So, most importantly, would be fast fashion's usage of sweatshops, which are basically these factories that are set up in mostly developing countries where there's not a lot of regulation. And the workers over here have to work extremely long hours, often more than 14 or 16 hours just in one day. And the conditions are extremely poor, where there is not a lot of good infrastructure, and the buildings are extremely old and are housing way too much weight than they can actually handle, which is what actually led to the Rana Plaza disaster in 2013 in Bangladesh, when the entire building collapsed because of how many people it was housing. So, apart from sweatshops, which is one of the most um, criticized aspects of fast fashion, one part which is often missed out is how fast fashion is actually a feminist issue as well. Because between 80 to 95% of workers in all sweatshops and government factories worldwide are estimated to be women. And these are usually women from already marginalized communities. For example, many of them are migrants. And this basically allows the factory owners and the supervisors to take advantage of them because they can get away with paying them even less. And the women are also less likely to speak out against any kind of abuse they face. And in the sweatshops, they often face a lot of physical, sexual, or emotional abuse. But because of their lower social status, it's unlikely that they'll actually speak out about it. One of the worst examples and almost shocking examples of just the kind of practices that exist in these sweatshops was uncovered a few years ago in a garments factory in Kerala in the southern state of India, where it was found out that supervisors were actually giving the women workers over there these pills to help them with any kind of pain. And just so that they could work longer hours. And these pills had no prescription, it had no label, there was no doctor giving these out, but the women were just freely taking them because they could not afford to miss work. And unfortunately, this created a really toxic cycle because these pills were extremely dangerous to their health and could cause miscarriages or infertility. And then it led to the women having to spend even more money to get treated at hospitals. And there was no regulation about this, there were no laws which were being enforced. So we can just understand how bad the conditions actually are. Apart from that, in general, the exits are often blocked. There are one of the reports even suggested that by a worker herself that the factory supervisors keep the washroom's purpose on dirt, keep it dirty on purpose just to ensure that nobody misses work by using them. So in case there's some kind of fire or some kind of natural disaster, it'll be practically impossible for these women or any kind of workers in sweatshops to leave because all the doors are shut to ensure that they don't steal any of the merchandise. Finally, children and child labor is also one of the most affected aspects of fast fashion. And not only is child labor often used in the sweatshops as themselves because children have smaller and more nimble fingers, which would allow them to do more intricate work. But most importantly, child labor is used during the cotton production part, where over 50% of cotton pickers in India are under the age of 18, and most of them are actually under the age of 14. So it's very clear now that although the economic aspect of fast fashion might seem very viable, the ecological and social aspects are definitely not sustainable and with causing extremely detrimental effects. Um, After this, we're going to do a more comparative analysis between how fast fashion actually affects different countries. So we're going to start by looking at fast fashion in France.
Donc en France, donc on va déjà commencer par une petite histoire en France de l'arrivée de la fast fashion. Donc les marques H&M et Zara ont fait leur entrée sur le marché français dans les années 90 à peu près. Et donc à ce moment-là, les grandes marques françaises ont été presque submergées, remplacées par donc ces nouvelles marques de fast fashion qui avaient un nouveau modèle de production. Et donc forcément, les marques françaises ont été obligées de se réinventer et la plupart ont cherché à reproduire le modèle de production des marques de fast fashion pour pouvoir rester concurrentielles. Parce que les marques de fast fashion pouvaient sortir des nouvelles collections toutes les 4 à 6 semaines, alors que les marques françaises ne sortaient que deux collections par an, une collection par saison. Et donc, par exemple, les marques comme Etam et Koukaï ont été vraiment obligées de reproduire le modèle de production de la fast fashion pour rester concurrentielle. Ensuite, en France, une étude a montré que 40% des adultes de plus de 18 ans préféraient acheter des habits auprès des marques de fast fashion. Et ça se voit puisque les marques de fast fashion attirent toujours énormément de clients, comme on peut le voir par les files d'attente immenses devant les magasins pendant les soldes, par exemple. Cependant, la population française est aussi quand même plus consciente des enjeux climatiques et sociaux de l'industrie de la mode. 65% des Français ont déclaré que lorsqu'ils décident d'acheter un habit, l'engagement que la marque de cet habit a dans le fait d'être durable était un critère important dans leur achat. Et donc, quand ils déclaraient ça, c'était le fait que l'habit qu'ils choisissaient soit fabriqué dans des conditions décentes, que la fabrication soit respectueuse de l'environnement et que les habits aient moins de produits chimiques dans leur composition. Ensuite, on peut aussi observer les pratiques des Français. Et donc, on peut déjà penser au sondage qu'on a fait. Et donc, dans ce sondage, on a demandé donc, aux répondants de nous dire ce qu'ils faisaient en priorité des habits qu'ils ne voulaient plus utiliser, qu'ils ne pouvaient plus utiliser. Et donc, la plupart nous ont répondu qu'ils choisissaient de donner leurs vêtements à des associations. Mais acheter d'occasion des vêtements ou des vêtements de seconde main est aussi devenu une pratique très courante. Et des plateformes comme Vinted, par exemple, sont de plus en plus utilisées par les Français. En un an, le nombre de Français membres de Vinted a augmenté de 12 millions à 16 millions. Et en 2019, IFM, l'Institut français de la mode, a rapporté que 39% de la population française avait déjà acheté des vêtements de seconde main. Et donc, c'est une pratique qui est quand même encourageante, puisque les produits qui ont déjà été portés et produits forcément polluent moins. Et du côté de la législation en France, les choses bougent aussi. En effet, le gouvernement prend aussi en compte les différents enjeux climatiques et sociétaux. Par exemple, récemment, une loi interdisant la destruction des invendus a été mise en place par le gouvernement. Et donc, dès 2023, les marques seront obligées de soit recycler, soit donner, soit réutiliser tous les invendus de leurs marchandises. Donc maintenant, nous allons pouvoir nous intéresser au côté indien de comment l'Inde vit avec la fast fashion.
So fast fashion in India is a little bit more complicated than what it is in France because India plays the role of both the manufacturer and the consumer. On a production level, of course, as we just came to know, a lot of sweatshops are located in India because factories can use them and make a higher profit. But India is also the number one producer of cotton worldwide, and which it unfortunately uses a lot of child labor to produce. So it does have that production element as well, especially amongst the lower classes who aren't really big consumers. But as globalization has begun to really take its course in India, it is soon becoming one of the biggest markets for fashion in the world. And by 2022, it's estimated to be the sixth biggest market for fashion, which would be equal to that of the United Kingdom or of Germany. So there are certain set of laws, and especially for child labor, there are laws which prevent um, children seeking employment under the age of 14 in hazardous conditions. But India is unfortunately not been able to implement any kind of legislation they have. And most of these regulations are left pretty much unchecked. So coming back to how it's gaining steam in the production, in the consumer part of view, before in the last few decades, before the introduction of fast fashion brands like H&M and Zara, which have entered the Indian market very, very recently, just in the past 5 years, India mostly relied on local shops or especially tailors, which are much more affordable in India than a lot of other westernized countries. And overall, in India, the culture of consumerism is much lesser than as compared to France or other Western nations. And there are a lot of practices, a lot of everyday practices and traditions which are inherently sustainable. For example, we found out in our survey, which had almost about half of our respondents were Indian, that most of them did not ever like dispose clothing. Instead, they either passed it on to somebody or even used it in their own households as a rag. So there are a lot of sustainable practices which Indians have been practicing for a lot of years, but unfortunately, as globalism continues, these are diminishing and fast fashion brands are gaining an upper hand. Now Ruta is going to be going to be and going to be comparing India and France.
Oui, donc pour cette analyse comparative, nous allons regarder vers ce qu'on a déjà vu pour en tirer quelques différences et quelques similarités. Dans la partie des différences, du côté de la production, nous avons remarqué que l'Inde est principalement un pays producteur et qu'elle produit du coton surtout. Mais la France ne produit pas, n'est pas une grande productrice du textile à l'échelle mondiale, mais quand même, elle est la troisième productrice du textile en Europe. Et le textile qu'elle fabrique le plus, c'est le lin. Ensuite, du côté de la consommation, nous avons remarqué que les Indiens et les Français pratiquent des pratiques durables différentes. Par exemple, les Français et surtout les jeunes Français, comme ils deviennent de plus en plus conscients de leurs impacts environnementaux, ils essaient de devenir de rendre leur consommation plus durable et ils achètent beaucoup plus de vêtements d'occasion. Mais cet achat des vêtements d'occasion n'est pas aussi fréquent en Inde. Et par exemple, même dans notre sondage, quelques répondants nous ont signalé ou témoigné qu'ils voulaient en fait acheter des vêtements d'occasion, mais qu'ils ne pouvaient pas le faire faute d'accessibilité et faute d'abordabilité. C'est pourquoi les consommateurs indiens sont obligés de recourir aux pratiques la couture à la main ou le partage des vêtements entre familles, entre amis. Et il y a aussi quelques similarités entre ces deux industries. La première étant que même si la fast fashion était entrée dans les deux pays à des moments différents, ces marques, elles ont vite établi leur marché considérable dans les deux pays et surtout dans les villes principales. Et encore une fois, comme notre sondage l'a révélé, les Indiens, tout comme les Français, la majorité d'entre eux, ils préfèrent faire des dons de charité aux associations quand ils ne veulent plus leurs habits. Et finalement, même si les conséquences, des conséquences néfastes subies par ces deux pays sont assez différentes, les gouvernements des deux pays prennent des mesures et mettent en place leur propre législation pour affronter ces défis. Donc, par exemple, bien sûr, en France, nous avons vu la loi contre l'excessive production des déchets. Et en Inde, nous avons vu que le ministère du Textile essaie d'introduire de nouvelles technologies pour effectivement traiter des eaux usées. Donc, pour conclure cette partie de la comparaison, nous pouvons remarquer que puisque les deux pays sont au niveau de développement différent, ils sont aussi touchés différemment par fast fashion. Parce que d'un côté, l'Inde, qui est un pays émergent, porte le maximum de fardeau de cette industrie, surtout au fond de la pollution et de la pénurie. Et pourtant, de l'autre côté, c'est la France qui est un pays développé, qui prend de grandes étapes sur la voie de la durabilité. Et parlons de la durabilité, nous allons maintenant voir quelques solutions que nous pouvons tous pratiquer pour rendre cette industrie plus durable.
We're going to begin by talking about what policymakers can do to make the fashion industry just overall more sustainable. As we just learned, fast fashion is extremely big and vast industry which spans across a lot of countries, and it's worth billions and billions of dollars. But unfortunately, it's mostly unregulated because it's much newer than other big industries like oil or gas. There's not really a lot of data or research into how exactly it impacts a country. So there aren't any laws about it either. So the first step we recommend policymakers to take is to actually collect data and just to finalize their research and create very precise definitions of fast fashion terms such as sustainability or ethical or greenwashing, so that they can prevent brands from misleading consumers. The next step should be to use the data and the research and to create very specific laws and update any existing legislation. And finally, something which was actually pointed out to us in an interview with Loom, the French fashion brand, was they pointed out about how sustainable brands really can't prosper just on encouragement. And unless the bad brands are actually punished, then the good brands or the sustainable brands will never actually prosper. So it's very vital that policymakers impose very strict consequences for brands or for companies that do not follow their laws. So, examples of just normal legislation which policymakers can do is banning the use of any kind of virgin plastic, which would encourage and promote recycling, or or like what Lizelle told us about how France banned the destruction of any unsold merchandise. Based on the consequences part of view, they could impose taxation on brands that have a higher carbon footprint, or they could impose taxes on products that are manufactured with toxic chemicals, which was something that was suggested by the Swedish parliament. Finally, unfortunately, although we have seen a boost in legislation around fast fashion in the recent years, they have mostly been restricted to just developed nations, which, as we know, are usually just the consumer countries. But the most exploitative practices in fast fashion happen during the production, which it be in the developing countries. So, although all these steps and all these laws are definitely a step towards sustainability, unless developing countries actually impose their own legislation, it's going to not really stop the exploitation. But unfortunately, for one, developing countries don't really have the resources or the infrastructure to implement any kind of regulations. But more importantly, it is the lack of regulations that attracts international companies to start sweatshops there. So if they were regulated, the production costs would obviously be higher, and the industry wouldn't be able to make such a big profit. So what we recommend is for developed countries to continue imposing a lot of legislation and to perhaps impose bans which increase taxation on clothes which are manufactured in unsafe conditions, which would have to force developing countries to also update their legislation. Ruta is now going to be telling us about what the industry and what retailers can do to make it more sustainable.
So yeah, as we've already seen, the fashion and the textile industries both need to undergo a whole systemic change to be more sustainable. And to achieve that goal, we need not only isolated actions, but we need more coordinated actions throughout the value chain. And so, for example, producers right at the very beginning of the production stage, while designing, say, or while cutting while making the garment, they need to ask themselves, am I cutting this fabric properly in a very efficient manner so as to minimize my waste? Or is this thread that I'm using, will it last long, or will it, deteriorate very easily? Or will this thread be recyclable at the end of the garment lifetime? And that points us to the first step which they can take is to invest in clean technology, which luckily a lot of innovators have bid researching in this domain, and they've come up with a lot of new innovations to create more eco textiles made with sustainable fibers like lyocell and cellulose. Um, and other than that, we also read about the applications of various methodologies, which, for example, they reused wet processing wastewaters again in the wet processing part, but of course after undergoing treatment. And lastly, there were also some companies which managed to recycle polyester and nylon from things like plastic bottles and fishing nets, which is very impressive. Secondly, of course, to address the social impact of the industry, the producers need to look at their workers' rights. They need to seriously consider their rights. They need to work for their workers. And for this, literally the bare minimum which they must do is obviously provide them a decent living wage, ensure their occupational safety. But other than that, we also need more rigorous laws on the prohibition of child labor and laws to stop the exploitation of workers and to stop, say, forced labor. But the problem for this, like it was pointed out to us by Tanvi, the Tamrin Chutney representative, she pointed out that the problem with international oversight organizations like Fairtrade is that their criteria, their certification criteria do not extend to a lot of countries. And so what law and also other laws which are applicable in one continent or in one country is not applicable in other countries, and that's why, as we already seen, the producers simply shift their manufacturing elsewhere and continue to exploit the people and the planet. Which is why we need more internationally recognized criteria and international laws. Um, and lastly, in the workers, in the ethical aspect, we also realized, again in Tamlin Chatney's interview, that women's employment is forms an essential part of fast fashion because, as we saw in the social aspect, they constitute a major part of the industry. And when after accidents like the Rana Plaza, when people say that these factories need to be shut down, we realize that's not really what needs to be done, because if we shut down these factories, we deprive these women of their only source of employment and their only source of financial independence. And this is why the answer is to improve their working conditions. And also in this part, we realize the importance of women's working organizations like SEWA, which is the Self-Employed Women's Association. And like how in the webinar the other day, we got a chance to meet Rima ji, and which really opened our eyes as to why women's employment is so important, especially in the rural communities, and how empowering it is for them. And also how they talked about their own fashion line, and uh, how they created their own fashion line. Um, yeah, and the third point was transparency, of course. Uh, so brands like Tamrin Chutney Alum are already transparent about their prices and their environmental impact, their actions, and how they treat their workers and everything. And we think other brands should take inspiration from such sustainable and ethical brands. And the major point to be noted here is that the information that they put out should be easily accessible to the consumers, because laymen like you and me are not going to go and read annual reports of companies before we buy anything, because obviously those reports are very complicated and lengthy. So what we suggest is this information should be directly accessible, so they can maybe put the price. They already obviously put the certifications on the tags, but they can also put the price breakup of their garment on the tag, or if it's online, they can put that in the product description. And this transparency becomes especially important as because of the threat of greenwashing. And so, as Loom suggested, because of the existence of exploitative brands, the good sustainable brands have to suffer and they lose their commercial viability, which made us think that maybe it would also be interesting to for the government to penalize greenwashing and misleading the customers. Uh, and there are also, to address these issues, there are two up and coming movements in the industry. First is the slow fashion movement, wherein which basically includes an economic degrowth, so reduced production and reduced consumption. And it also focuses on the durability of a garment, to make sure that the garment lasts for a long time, and that it is of a high quality. And circular fashion is part of a business model called circular economy, which essentially produces in a closed loop production, which means that they intend to keep the garment for as long as possible without the garment reaching the waste or the disposal stage, so that we can make the most out of it by recycling it again and again, and or giving it in the second hand market. And this can of course be favored by access based consumption models like sharing economy and collaborative consumption. And finally, the list is obviously endless, but some other measures which producers can take is signing international agreements like the recent Bangladesh Accord, which was renewed. Because by signing these agreements, they hold themselves accountable publicly. And secondly, we also have something that's called extended producer responsibility, which is a practice that, like the name suggests, it puts the responsibility of waste disposal on the producers. So it essentially makes waste a cost for them, so that they minimize their cost. And I think the law which was proposed in France can be an example of that. And lastly, brands, because they have such a huge platform, they can make use of it to spread consumer awareness, and to make sure that their consumers do not buy from fast fashion brands. So we have the example of Tamlin Chutney and Doom, which on their Instagram page or on online articles, they inform and educate the consumers so that they engage in more responsible consumption. And speaking of responsible consumption, now we'll move on to the consumers part of sustainable fashion.
So now I will present the solution for consumers. So what we all can do. So the first thing we can do, of course, is refrain from buying too many clothes, because that's the main problem, as we saw. Because we saw earlier that we buy on average 60 pieces of clothes a year. So we can just refrain from buying too many clothes. That's the main goal. Because of course, if we buy less clothes, fast fashion brands would be forced to reduce their production. Secondly, we could also buy more sustainable clothes, like Loom or TC's clothes, so from sustainable brands. Those clothes can last in time and be used for years, and so we don't have to buy too many clothes. We don't have to buy new clothes every year. We don't have to buy a new jean every year, so less pollution and less problems. But that solution is quite hard to make, because those sustainable brands are not available everywhere. So you cannot buy easily from sustainable brands. And also, of course, they are very expensive clothes. So not everyone can afford to pay to pay for those. And lastly, when a consumer wants to get rid of a piece of clothing, they could, rather than just throwing them away, these clothes can be repaired, donated to family or friends. They can also be sold through second-hand clothes platforms like we saw. And finally, if they cannot be used at all, you can put them in recycle bins. But this last solution should be kept as an exception, because nowadays the amount of clothes put in recycling bins is enormous. And some of those recycled clothes are only just sent to developing countries and just burnt. So, and one last thing you could do also is use a new system of clothes renting, but it appeared a few years ago, so it's very new, but maybe it will grow in the next few years, we never know. So these are the consumer solutions we can all apply in our daily life. But I don't believe that just those consumer solutions will change everything. We have to combine every solutions that we talked about today to actually change things. So now we will just conclude. So we will present to you the presentation formats that we choose. We decided not to stop there, and we decided to create an Instagram account to present to everyone what we learned and to make people aware of what we learned and what we got shocked about. So in the pictures, you can see what we planned. So we plan to start posting on this Instagram account next Monday, and we will post 3 posts a week. So it's a way for us to continue this journey together and to warn people about fast fashion issues. So finally, maybe we will just have a word about how we felt about this experience. So we will all talk. So I will start. So personally, I think it was a great experience because I got to know amazing people and we got to work together, even if it was quite hard because we were not physically together. It's quite hard to work together, but it was very easy with Luta and Laika. And also on fast fashion, I learned a lot. And now every time I go to a fast fashion shop or every time I see a fast fashion clothes, I am shocked and I am reminded everything that I learned, and I cannot buy fast fashion clothes anymore. So it was very shocking to me, and it changed a lot in my consumption habits. So maybe Ruta and Raika have more to say.
Yeah, sure. So before even like starting this project, I had a very faint idea about what fast fashion is all about. But after doing all this research, it really opened my eyes to a lot of the malpractices that are prevalent in the industry. And usually I find statistics very boring, but I think the statistics which we found in the research were really staggering, and they were bothering, of course, but like especially the jeans statistic, like every time I look at a pair of jeans now, I'm overcome with guilt. But I'm going to take it in a positive stride, and I think that'll henceforth encourage me to take more sustainable actions, like just as simple as not buying in the first place. And maybe if I ever get the chance, I obviously try to buy more secondhand. And yeah, and for the research project part of it, I really enjoyed working on this with Raika and Lizelle. We had a lot of fun. I don't know, I think it went really well because I loved getting suggestions from them. We always used to send each other suggestions to really contribute and make each other's writing better. And what else? I think we took constructive criticism really well, and we divided the work really well. I think the coordination was great, and I'm definitely going to miss working with them. So now we have the Instagram page to continue that. And I think I'll just take a moment to thank the mentors as well here, because obviously they also helped us a lot with their suggestions, and that really refined our papers. Yeah, and I think Raika will also have similar things to say.
It's pretty much the same as what both of you already said. But I think even though we were all in like different cities and different time zones, working together was, it went by really smoothly and it went by a lot faster than like we could have anticipated. And I think the program itself, like for me, it was the survey and the interview, which I felt were extremely educative. Even the webinars for that matter, because especially the interview with Tamar and Chutney, like we learned so much, and there was, just to hear it from somebody who was doing that work themselves, it was extremely shocking because there were so many like wasteful aspects of fast fashion that we never even considered before. So to hear it directly from somebody, and even by conducting the survey ourselves and hearing what people around us thought, it was extremely interesting. And I think just like Ruta and Lizelle said, every time I like see a cute top in a store, I'm just like, I feel so guilty. I cannot buy it anymore. And we really hope that by working on our Instagram account, we'll be able to instill that same guilt into everybody else, and everybody will just become a little bit more conscious while shopping. Just to end our presentation, we actually wanted to change it up a little and we wanted to ask you a few questions. So if you could just show the questions, please.
Uh, I don't have the questions here.
Oh,
Could you?
yeah, I'll just read them out.
Okay, sorry.
So we had a few questions that we really would appreciate if you guys would give us your thoughts about them. So first, we were wondering if you were aware of fast fashion before this, and were you aware on just the kind of impact it has on society and on the environment?
So, Raika, I would like to answer that. So, we've definitely heard about fast fashion when we learned it as part of, environmental education at school. So, but it was just such a small subset of what this wonderful presentation was. I mean, definitely, it has been such an eye opener for, even the board members here today. And we never went in so much detail, and for us to understand it from the point of view of two different nations, I think, and how it is affecting the economy of these two countries, and how the global the entire market for fast fashion works. It was definitely very informative and very detailed. So we were aware of it, but to have it having such a great impact, I mean, never really ever thought of it. So I'm actually speechless with all this information, and like I'm quite happy that you all reached out to Tamrin Chutney, and I've been following their page for quite a long time. So I was really happy to hear that you all actually got in touch with them. So great job, guys.
Thank you so much.
I
We are
personally loved the way you guys started. I think that story was so interactive. So it was amazing. It was a very informative presentation. Personally, I don't know a lot about sustainable development, so I learned a lot over here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Just one last question. I think we've gone a little bit overboard with our time. But what do you think we as individuals, after hearing all like the solutions and everything, what do you think would be the best way we as individuals can make the industry more sustainable?
Ooh, that's a difficult question.
I think since you are young people, one of the most important things you could do is start your own leadership organizations. I mean, I can personally vouch for the fact that you guys are more than capable of it. And you can, it doesn't even have to be an organization that reaches like 1,000 people. One person understanding the impact of sustainable development and how important it is, especially in like today's day and time. I mean, why not? And you guys are very capable of it. And having worked on a very like bilingual project and everything, with the French perspective, I mean, you have two perspectives in mind when you're working on something like this. So I think it's, make your own organization. We'll be happy to support you. And it doesn't even have to be an organization that does on the ground work, It can be like awareness campaigns, for example. So I think that would be a very interesting stuff for you guys to take.
May I say something?
Yeah, sure.
I think we should finance you traveling all over the world to make this presentation known to other people.
It's really
Seriously, it was such an eye opener
Yes,
indeed,
very
and
good.
it was very well researched, and we're really proud of the quality of the work. And a big thanks and a great shout out to the mentors here who really
yes.
sought, who maintained the standard. Such a stellar, presentation. Indeed, I think the Institut Français people are going to be really, really happy with the project. Really.
Can we give the floor to the two mentors, because
Exactly.
I'd like to have their feedback quickly.
I would like to clarify that
Yes.
we did not see the final presentation before. So it was a surprise to us as well. We had, of course, read the papers, the research papers, which they did, but the final presentation was a surprise for us as well. And I'm sure that Gino would agree with me when I say that it was excellent. And I'm really, really proud of all of you.
Yeah.
I'm really happy with your work. It's amazing.
Yeah. And
I don't have much to add, but just I wanted you guys to know that I've been talking to a lot of people about you guys, and I'm extremely, extremely impressed about the work you did. I hope you guys are representative of the youth that's out there right now, because that would give us a lot of hope for the future. So thanks so much. The work was really great. Apart from all the academic qualities you guys have, you write so perfectly in both languages. You really are really good. And you're way younger than us, so it's kind of scary in a way, but hey, congratulations for that. I feel really, really hopeful. You're young and yet full of inspiration. So be the tamarind chutney of others. You've enjoyed seeing them. Go be that for other people because they need it. Not everyone is as aware as you guys. So thanks again. Once again, yeah, because she's right. We didn't see anything from the presentation and whoa, you guys are really, really good. So congrats again. I've said enough, but I'll keep talking about you to a lot of people around, saying that, hey, there's a lot of anxiety out there because of fast fashion, because of environment, but you gave us hope. So I'll keep praising you guys.
Yes, just to add to what Gino just said. So even I have been talking a lot about your research and I want to share it with the others. And actually, I absolutely love the idea of your final presentation in which you are going to share whatever you researched on Instagram so that you make other people aware as well. So maybe you could add another point in your solutions part. It is to make others aware about the fast fashion problem. So I'm really glad that you chose this method to present it to the masses, because this will help us to not restrict the research work in the organization. It will help to reach out to the masses and to others, not just in India, but all around the world, because Instagram is a global platform. So anyone and everyone can access that. And I'm really glad that you chose that. And I would like to congratulate you guys for that. It's excellent work. I'm so proud of you.
And
I'm
be
just
sure
thinking, sorry, Jean-Claude, just a tiny word. Please do something about the story of Milo, because I would bet all my money that at least 80% of the people I know, even if they're concerned about fast fashion or whatever, they don't know that it goes out to Kenya. They think clothes just die and go into space or whatnot. We don't know. No one knows. They need to hear the story about Milo.
Yes, that's true. Very true.
That was a very beautiful depiction. Seriously, like in the very few minutes you had all our eyes and attention, and we were so glued to the screen. We were eagerly waiting to hear what's coming next. And seriously, it was a wonderful presentation. Keep it up, guys.
Yeah, and we need you for the future sessions of our program. Are you
Definitely, definitely.
Good.
Both the mentors and the group members, so that you can keep coming up with wonderful research projects and on work on various other themes and collaborate with the future teams. So we're definitely looking forward to have you with us for a very long time.
Yeah. And come to France also as soon as possible. N'est-ce pas, Kouchi?
If somebody could sponsor us.
I have some idea.
Okay, c'est bon.
Okay, thank you. So we'll keep. I mean, Nandini will be in touch within a few
Right.
days. Now, once, yeah, we will collect. You are the number 3 among the 5 modules. So we still have 2 meetings to go before
Right.
we get in touch with the embassy, with the Institut Français. And so as soon as possible, we'll come back to all of you. Yeah.
Before we end, do you have any questions for us?
Sorry?
We're hoping not, but do you have any questions for us?
Question?
Because you answered our questions really well, so we wouldn't mind doing the same.
Oh.
Okay, I would like to ask the question. So during the process, these 8 weeks, I mean, the topic of fast fashion, all the research that you've been doing, do you think at a subconscious level, it did make a difference to you at any given point? Were you being more mindful about the purchases or, the things that you were using? Was it, a very personal transformation for you as well at any given stage during this 8-week program?
Yes, Liesel and Ruta said that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely changed our mindset a lot. I mean, even earlier, like I said, we all had a faint idea of what fast fashion was, but I think after seeing the impacts at such a close level, it became more real for us.
Right.
And I think that's why that's what will us to not buy from fast fashion brands and take more sustainable steps and everything. Yeah.
Wow.
If I may add to that, so not
Yes,
just the
yes.
mentees, but I guess even the mentors have become more mindful, because now even I think about my consumption, and I've stopped using fast fashion brand, or as in I used the ones which I had purchased before, but I've stopped buying from any fast fashion brand, and I have become more mindful of my consumption, and I try to buy only secondhand. And that's why I would like to highlight how much I learned even as a mentor. So I would really like to thank you guys, because I had an idea of the ecological aspect of fast fashion, but I did not really have an idea about the social aspect, and some of the things were really heartbreaking and eye-opening, especially about the treatment with the workers, the female workers in Bangladesh, especially, be it giving them pills so that they don't miss out work, or keeping the toilets purposefully dirty. These are the things which I had never read about or watched in the documentaries, nothing about it. So I would really like to thank you, because I, even as a mentor, learned a lot. And not just in terms of research, but even in terms of writing. Their the first paper which they wrote, and the first paragraph had the story of Milo, and it was mind-blowing. I was blown away by their story. So I learned a lot, not just in terms of information, but even the writing skills, the presentation skills. So thank you guys, great job.
Thank you. We couldn't have done it without you.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Yeah, I've learned a lot of things, like all of you and mentors. I was aware of certain aspects, of course, but you had been much further, much more in details. And I think you could go on and on again. Let me tell you, I had the privilege to visit Tirupur. You know Tirupur in southern India, about 10, 12 years ago, when it was really starting. And I was aware, I was little aware of some potential problems, the way you have described, but I did not ask the right questions. I remember now, after having listened to you, that I should have been asking much more detailed question. At that time, I was relatively happy and satisfied after this visit, of this workshop in Tirupur. And the river, Tirupur is in Andhra or in Tamil Nadu. I'm not sure about. It's near Coimbatore. But frankly speaking, I must confess, I was very naive when I see what you have been presenting today. And thank you also for this. And I think not only the younger population should be through Instagram, as you said, should be informed about your work, but also the older generation, because they would realize what young people like you can do. And it is also very important in my opinion. Yeah, thank you.
Talking about asking the right questions, I have one last question. Did you think of a name for your Instagram account?
Yeah, it's called Fast Fashion, but it's misspelled because we couldn't get the handle wasn't available. So we just misspelled it. I think we can.
Or maybe
or you could dedicate it to Milo.
Milo, that's what I was going to say. We could give it to Milo.
We were planning to do that, but we thought it wouldn't be very direct as to what the account is about. So that was the reason we didn't go with Milo.
We have included Milo's story though.
Milo's story is still there.
That's all Milo's story.
Yes, please share the handle with us.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
we will start posting from next week. So yeah, this is the name. Instead of so the Shan pronunciation, instead of that we chose U, but instead of U, again visually representative, we chose A because the handles weren't available. So we just misspelled it. But yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you. So I'll end the meeting. Thank you, everyone.
Yes. Thank you.
Good